Okay, so we're now recording. My name is Jeannie Jaworski, and I am really excited to be here with an incredible panel of folks who have made the transition from student affairs to another area of higher education. And I shared with our panelists, I'm particularly excited about this panel because I think that there are a lot of opportunities for transition in this area. There's a lot of transferable skills, obviously, because we've all already familiarized ourselves so much with the operations of higher education. And yet, at the same time, there may be folks who have discounted this opportunity, and because of whatever is going on in your student affairs path, you may have said, I'm not sure that I want to be in higher ed at all anymore. So I think it's really great to have voices who have made that transition and who have landed in much happier places and who are able to speak about that for us. So just a few quick housekeeping items before we get going. Everyone is muted right now. The chat is open though, so if you have any questions at any time, feel free to use the chat to share your questions. You have the option of asking things anonymously as well. So two options for that. One, if you, in the participant list, click on more, all of you have the option to rename yourselves. So you're welcome to rename yourself to something that does not disclose your identity. The other option is to somewhat anonymously send me a message. I will be able to see whatever you're named at in Zoom, but I won't reveal your identity when I weave in that question for our panelists. Another thing is, if you would prefer to ask your questions, you do have the ability to just let me know and I'm happy to unmute you. And that way you can ask directly the panelists if that's something that you would like to do. All right, also on your screen is a bit.ly link. So that will take you to a Google Drive where you can find the bios for all of our panelists for the entire series. And many of them have decided to generously share things like their LinkedIn profile and their resume and additional resources. So please check that out. Our panelists have been really, really generous in giving us a lot of information to help us, make that transition. Okay, so I'm going to now turn it over to our incredible panel and invite them to introduce themselves. And for this introduction, if you could tell us, obviously, your name, who you are, as well as your current role or most recent role, and then also what your background is in student affairs so that we can know where there might be alignment with some of our attendees. So we'll go ahead and ask Lindsay to start.
All right, well, thank you. It's fun to be here. My name is Lindsay Kamakahi. I was most recently working in Bhutan for Royal Thimphu College. It's the first private institute in the Kingdom of Bhutan. I just want to throw out there that most of my experience in higher education is not in the US. So I will have a lot of background of non-US things. I was working in the external relations department. I was working as faculty. I was the creator of the first BA mass communication program in the Kingdom of Bhutan. Previously, I worked with Webster, Thailand, but I have worked with young learners as well as corporate teaching. So I have just kind of a hodgepodge of background, mainly related to education, but not always higher education. So I guess that's what I'll start with and then pass it on. Thanks.
I'm John Mack. I'm the Associate Director of Customer Service Operations at Carroll University. And what that really means is I work with our service desk in the IT department. I manage the professional staff there as well as the student staff. And previous to being in IT, I had 16 years of experience working in residence life, both on the RA and student side, and then also the operations side.
Good afternoon or morning, everyone. My name is Travis Olson, and I'm a program manager at the Aspen Institute, which is a national nonprofit headquartered in Washington, D.C., but originally started in Aspen, Colorado, hence the name. And that it's a large organization that does a lot of different work, but I work for a program called the College Excellence Program, which is primarily focused on helping community colleges improve how many students that they graduate, and doing that work in an equitable manner. I have a fairly traditional higher education student affairs background. I got involved in student organizations, some student advocacy at my undergraduate institution, Loyola Chicago. Then I had some mentors in student affairs that encouraged me to go get my master's at Ohio State. And then I worked for about 3 years at Johns Hopkins University in leadership development programs before making the switch to the nonprofit sector.
Hello, everyone. My name is Robyn Stuart, and I am Assistant Director of Alumni Relations at Virginia Tech in the College of Engineering. I started out kind of similar to Travis, was involved in student organizations in my undergrad at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. And then my senior year, I actually worked in the event planning office in the Office of Events. And so that kind of helped me set my path for going into higher ed, because I realized it wasn't just res life, as my 1 year of being an RA wasn't my favorite year. So I initially started in student activities. I had a internship and practicum in assistantship, all in student activities, did another practicum in the advancement events office, and worked at a community college in academic support and new student orientation. And then I served as assistant director of student activities at a small private school in Pennsylvania for 5 years full-time, as working with new student orientation and the student programming board before transitioning into the world of advancement.
Great. Well, thank you all again for being here. So typically my first question is to ask about the transferable skills, but I'm actually going to maybe not ask that question directly, because I think that working with students, we all recognize that many of the skills that we have developed are transferable in terms of both the skill set we have as well as the knowledge base that we've developed. So what I want to ask is actually about your transition and what gaps you had. So in addition to everything you brought, were there any knowledge gaps that you had, or things that you had to learn that you didn't bring with you from your student affairs background? And then what did you do to go about obtaining that knowledge to fill those gaps? So I'm going to start with John for this question.
Sure. So I joined the IT department and I have zero IT background, actually. I came into it through a knowledge of our access control system we were using in residence life. And as always in residence life, you wear multiple hats, and part of my many hat wearing was managing the access control system. So when I came over to IT, I was also managing that. We were adding cameras, but then I was also running the service desk. So I asked lots of questions. I followed people around. I watched our students. I watched our staff, and just tried to suck up as much knowledge as I could so that I could answer questions, assist people, backfill when my service desk staff was busy, and also, understand what they do and how to support them best.
Thanks, John. Travis, how about you? What was your experience?
Yeah, so in my role, my primary responsibility is to manage a network of community colleges, and these community colleges have signed up to be studied so that what they are doing to help students succeed can be replicated across the field. And I think the biggest gap one of the thing is, or I guess revealed to me, is how invisible is such an important sector of higher education is to student affairs.
I'm not sure if it's on my end, but I'm having quite a bit of issues.
Similar integrated. Okay. Are others?
I wonder, maybe Travis, if you want to try and turn off your video and see if that would allow greater bandwidth for the audio.
trouble hearing me? Yeah.
All right. I'm going to have,
It doesn't seem to be helping.
okay, I think there's just a bit of delay. So maybe what we can do is go ahead and move on and see if Robyn wants to answer this question. And then Travis, if you'd like, you might want to try and leave and re-enter the meeting and see if that helps at all. Okay, perfect. Wonderful. All right. Thanks for that, Travis. Robyn, take it away for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting, having worked in the advancement office as an undergrad, I had a little tiny peek into this world of advancement. And I think, you know, I actually wrote in one of my first papers in grad school about my future goals and working with alumni events. And so I ended up here without really, it did happen to be coincidence. And my husband is also in student affairs and student conduct. So when we were doing a dual search, moving to Southwest Virginia, there's not a lot of options besides Virginia Tech and Radford University in this area. So that kind of helped me narrow down my focus and staying in this field. And so I originally started as a special events coordinator for donor events. And I think one of the biggest gaps I had was really coming from working at a very small private institution to an extremely large public institution. That was more of a learning curve than anything else. The advancement jargon was a little bit new to me, but all of my colleagues had different backgrounds outside of higher ed. So I think our team was prepared to coach any new employee on a lot of that. There was already a lot of training documents in place and everything. So my coworkers, my supervisor came from Chamber of Commerce, and then 3 others came from the hotel industry in different areas. So it was almost more learning how to communicate with them on common terms, because I didn't come from the hotel industry. So learning the way they were speaking, even though it's not specifically to higher ed.
Thanks, Robyn. Lindsay, what about you?
My background is kind of different anyway. The first time I dealt with college students, my parents had taken a study abroad from their university to China. And when the directors couldn't find them, I was the de facto person that hands off information. So that's my background with how I got into it. And then I went to school in Macau, next to Hong Kong. So by default, I was also the person that was in charge of all the international students, because my roommate and I were there for 4 years as opposed to a semester or a year. So I had a lot of practical skills from that background, and also trying to navigate all of these things at universities that didn't have international students long term. So with my parents both being in academia, I knew a lot of the terms, I knew a lot of how the systems work, the dysfunction between the systems, and then the complaints that everyone has, from faculty to student affairs to admin to all of these things. So I typically still bounce in between all of them because I enjoy them, but I think it's useful to understand all of the different problems that occur. So there's always like a faculty admin battle. And so when I'm faculty, I just go, but I'm still faculty. And then they kind of go, okay, well, all right. And we can work on it that way. I try to do a lot of first year seminar or whatever it's called at each of the institutes, so that I can make sure that it pertains to any kind of the policy. So for those transition gaps, I try to actively get involved so I can help others understand what's going on, because it's not easy to understand one side and then we dismiss the other side. So it's just trying to get everyone on the same page. So for me, each university has its ups and downs, but just getting everyone on the same page and having a voice at the table, I think that's the main thing that I end up doing in the transition gaps, is just getting everyone to talk about what's going on.
That sounds like appropriate work for someone who's spent a career in international and intercultural education. So I'm sure your skills are to good use there. Travis, it looks like you've been able to join us back, right, which is great. I know for me, I started losing your audio when you were transitioning, talking about how you had you went to your master's at Ohio and that's about where I feel like I lost you.
Okay. Good. All right. So I was sharing that I think my biggest gap coming from a traditional student affairs program was the fact that we didn't ever talk about community college students. It was maybe a couple papers and 2 years of coursework. So, and there is a whole subfield out there of how community colleges are unique institutions within higher education and have unique needs and really are serving this very important access and equity mission for a lot of students who come from lower SES or backgrounds, or who are Black and Latino or Indigenous. So I spent a lot of my first year just reading what has already been published. So there's a great center at Columbia College called the Community College Research Center, CCRC. There are national organizations out there that are not only great resources for learning about community colleges, but also great employers. So Achieving the Dream is a big one, where they teach community colleges how to use data. And also the Aspen Institute has a lot of good resources, a lot of publications that are all open access that talk about how community colleges serve a unique purpose in both the education, but also in the economy. And I think that I just spent a lot of time in my first year absorbing that through reading, but then also through dialoguing with folks that had been in this area of higher education for a little bit longer. I think I found that in my current role, there's a lot less pressure to immediately deliver than in student affairs, where you get hired and then you're expected to start working on orientation like 2 weeks later. So that was how I filled in the gaps mostly.
Great, thank you. And I think after listening to you all share, I think actually there is value in going back to that question about transferable skills, because a lot of you talked about how you were coming in with no hard knowledge, or at least much different knowledge of your functional area. And so how did you make the case for your unique path being one that would, bring a lot of advantages to the team that you were joining? So I think that we, Travis, if you're comfortable, keep chatting. We'll go ahead and throw this one to you first.
Definitely. So it was kind of interesting because I was looking for a variety of jobs. I just knew I wanted something different. So I applied to some jobs at for-profit companies in leadership, sort of HR staff development positions. I stumbled across this one because a mentor of mine has gotten a job in a different department. And my supervisor told me after I got the job that I was hired because I understood firsthand what it feels like to go through an organization that is changing. So my first job, my only full-time job in student affairs was very chaotic. I got hired into a department that was rapidly changing, reorganizing. A lot of people had been let go. There were some high-profile crises, and then I didn't have a supervisor for a year and a half. And then when we did get a supervisor, it didn't really help, I guess, is a short way to put it. So I tried to use that experience of living through organizational change, and is a nice way to put it, but also organizational chaos, to say that I could relate to these practitioners that are at institutions that are trying to do similar large-scale changes. So one thing that is happening in the funding and policy world of higher ed is performance-based funding. So an increasing number of states are saying that you only get money if you increase the number of students that you graduate, or the number of students that are successfully completing courses. And that's leading to some some dramatic and sometimes hectic changes at public universities and colleges. So using what was a negative experience to my benefit was definitely how I found myself in this particular role.
Great, thank you. And I just want to make sure every single person heard this about how you can use your experiences in organizational change, because right now, if you're still employed in higher education, or if you've recently been employed in higher education, you have gone through so much change and you've adapted your roles so much. So using that, and I think that probably what Travis did is he showed leadership in it. And so it is a fine line, and kind of, you don't want to out your previous organization, right? You don't want to complain about your previous organization. You just want to show that how during chaos you were able to be a leader through that. So that's great. Thanks, Travis. Okay, Robyn, how did you make yourself shine?
Yeah, so, you know, having worked in student activities, I had event planning skills, very different from having a like $1,500 event to a $150,000 event. But, you know, just knowing those basic steps in the volume that I was producing at this small institution of doing 5 to 7 programs a week, and then translating that volume of work of being able to keep up with all those details was huge. So just general project management, which I think we all end up having somewhat in our responsibilities in higher ed and student affairs. I can't think of a single role that doesn't have some sort of project to manage. So those kind of skills are really key for moving into the work that I do. And then also budget management. You know, I think we've all had our hands in that as well. And so being able to manage a budget, all of our events were on a mostly strict budget, and just being able to keep those budget lines separate and understand how to work with the budget and where the funding was coming from. You know, I work at a public state institution, but a lot of the funds for our events come from donors, so it comes to the foundation. So these complicated funding lines, I think we've all experienced as well. If anybody has worked in, you know, a res life that's an auxiliary service or something like that. And then also setting goals and objectives for programming. You know, we all learn in our student affairs background how to set like learning objectives for our students, and that translates directly into creating programming for engaging alumni and donors. You know, we don't assess it in quite the same way, but those things are still really important to, especially just working in academia in general, that everyone wants to see these set goals and assess things that aren't necessarily tangible. So what's the experience of our donors at the events, and how does that translate into their future giving? And so looking at that kind of deeper assessment of objectives and goals. And then, you know, just general, like how higher education functions as a whole, the funding lines, and be able to translate that to our donors too. Now that I'm working more directly with alumni, as opposed to just on the logistics side of events, being able to explain that the state funding and the tuition dollars only go so far for a student's experience really helps our alumni understand why it's so important for them to give back to their institutions. And, you know, they assume that the state funds the full university experience. They assume that tuition covers whatever the state doesn't. And also explaining how an annual fund works, you know, that we aren't just like funding slush funds for our deans to go throw fancy parties, that they're giving those dollars back to student experiences and faculty presentations and grants for different work at all different levels within the university, that it's not just for the dean to go fly around the world. So kind of having that understanding, as well as how all of the work that we do and all of those dollars benefit directly the students and the student experience, and how important that out of class experiential learning is. And just connecting with our older alumni about what the current student experience is like. You know, having that student affairs background is really key to understand the base of all the work that we do, which is the students. So if the students didn't exist, my role wouldn't exist. And so having that kind of all tucked back there helps translate into all the work that I do with our alumni.
Great, thank you so much, Robyn. Lindsay.
All right. Yes to everything they said. And then continuing on, some of the ideas I heard are, yes, that communication to everyone so that expectation management is clear. I feel that's something that is very important because, yes, we're all communicating, but is everyone on the same boat? Are they understanding that we can't do everything? We can't do everything. We're amazing people, but we are not, the superheroes that can just get everything done. And bringing in that realistic expectation to the table, be it, for me, it was a lot of the cultural management. It was a lot of, okay, I'm on the faculty side and I'm on the admin side. You can't possibly be saying that none of them are doing anything and they need more work. No one needs more work at this point. We need to figure out how to, not recreate the wheel and, use each other's strengths so we can move on. So I found a lot of the things I had to do were translating over those leadership skills and delegating out and mentoring people into the areas that they weren't necessarily comfortable with, but explaining how their piece fits a larger whole. And I feel especially these research skills that we have, we're very good at researching and doing very little with budgets. So as Robyn was saying, it's how do we make these things work? And we're very thrifty and good at it, but you wouldn't necessarily consider that something maybe under research and analytical skills, but it's a very strong skill that we use all the time. And especially with running things like orientation, those are skills. It's always all the back of the house stuff that no one sees going on. But if we don't hear complaints, yay, we did a great job, but we forget how much work went into it and how much we actually did. So it's just putting all those background pieces together that maybe no one sees, but all of those pieces are individually something that I feel we are doing well with.
I agree. Thank you so much, Lindsay. And John, we'll close this question with you.
Okay. I think the biggest thing I brought was a user perspective. What I really found was when I transitioned to IT, they really didn't understand a lot of what happened at the university. They very much understood the technical part of it and how things worked and why they did things. But there was a very big lack of understanding of why did students act certain ways, or why did students need certain things? Why did student affairs do things in the way that they did? So I was able to really help kind of transition, and in a lot of meetings and a lot of projects be able to say, well, did we look at this from a student perspective? Maybe we need to not use the language we use in IT. Maybe we need to think about how do we say this that the students understand it. And especially coming from student affairs and having a lot of different experiences and connections there, I was able to help them understand, no, it's not that they're being difficult. It's that that's kind of the process of how students come through things, or maybe that's how, housing signs people up and assigns people to rooms. And that's the reason why, their process looks like that rather than fitting into this neat little process that IT expected. And then my second part was just really my work with students and helping them understand the student perspective, and that student affairs, wasn't just all about RAs and student living, but it was so much more.
That's awesome. And I think one of the things I was thinking as you were talking is that people may think, well, you only understand student affairs, you don't understand this other aspect, but what they don't realize is that every single thing that a student is upset with on campus, they're complaining to us about, right? And so we get to hear the complaints about IT or the bursar's office or, whatever it may be. And so that gives us, now, of course, we take everything we hear with a, understanding that it's one perspective and giving our colleagues the benefit of the doubt, but it is something that we have an ear to the ground in a different way about, I feel like. Okay, so I really want to know, this is the question that I've been thinking about the whole time with this panel, is the environment that big of a change? Because I think for a lot of us, if we feel as though we're in, and this may not be everyone's experience who wants to leave, there's many reasons to leave, but if we feel as though we keep encountering toxic environments, is leaving student affairs sufficiently different for you to avoid that type of environment? And really, I'm kind of curious about receipts on this. Like, can you be specific about how you have had more healthy work-life balance, how you have been, maybe given more appropriate responsibility with, responsibility for making decisions, with also dealing with the outcomes of those decisions, those kinds of things. So I'm really curious what you all have to share on that. And I think this time we're starting with Robyn.
Yeah, so it's interesting to reflect. I definitely, I changed institutions at the same time that I changed areas within higher ed. But it's definitely a lot healthier balance. We all work really hard and have the same kind of like make a lot happen with a little, regardless of if it's, and in this area, it's more so time than money. But it's still, or fewer people make more things happen. But, one example I've really noticed is with COVID, that leadership in both, so I kind of dually report to our central advancement group and under the dean of engineering. We have a lot of dotted lines in our organizational chart, which we've had a lot of structural change. And so I think, we're like 4 years in at this point, it's finally starting to work and make sense, but there's been growing pains since then. But, hearing the message from both sides, both the academic dean and our vice president for advancement, that our priority being home was taking care of our family, was huge. That was number one over and over. And it's like my background, it took me 3 weeks to really listen to that I was like tracking every minute of work in between caring for my 3-year-old while my husband was still in his office. And my boss was like, stop doing that. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You get done what you can get done. We'll have a conversation about it. And so that was really a huge reflection point for me in thinking about all the differences and how well I'm supported as a person with a family. And that even when I was working events, like everything was very well balanced, and people really, we travel and especially our fundraisers are on the road a lot, but that there's a pretty significant expectation for some under the table comp time kind of stuff to make up for the times that we're traveling. And really thinking about burnout and supporting all of us. So that's been a huge piece for me. I think everyone also just, for the most part, acts more professionally. A lot of people come more from a business world, so it's just a different background of everyone's had different work experiences leading into these areas. And the professionalism of needing to work with alumni and donors is at a completely different level. And so that really helps everyone kind of set the tone. And yeah, we have meetings that are awful and people end up yelling at each other like children. It happens. But I think overall, we all have a goal of reaching these really high goals of what money we're bringing in and the number of alumni we're engaging. And so it becomes a really collaborative environment to get to that point where we're all working together to achieve these enormous goals. So yeah, that kind of work-life balance and support from leadership is definitely very different on this side of the house.
Thanks, Robyn. Lindsay, talk about your experience a little bit.
All right, mine is again different because the US has such a residential life based education. It's either a commuter college or it's a res life college. But when I've worked abroad, that's not really the case. Even if we have dorms, even if we have student affairs, it's not quite the same as the US. And so I think mine will be a little bit different because I have seen, again, like Robyn was saying, it's leadership as well. And I was lucky, I've been at some young universities where I'm the only one that doesn't have a terms of reference. They just say, you've done things, fix things, make things. So I would be given the ability to make these things work for different groups, or to be kind of that bridge between student affairs and the international students. But then as I began teaching, I also got to do it for the local students. And I think it had a lot to do with leadership. I can't see in a lot of these huge universities in the US that it would be like that, where you would go in and they wouldn't have a job descriptor for you, even if it's, something new that they're doing. They kind of have some kind of idea, but because I was able to go in, I said, okay, these are what I'm seeing as the foreigner. You're foreigner, I am not from here, so these things are what I'm seeing we could do or not do or replicate or just get rid of. It's not a good idea. So I always got a lot of pushback from certain people because it's a continuous thing of why fix it if it's not broken. But I had the leadership behind me to say, no, she knows because she's been at different universities. So I don't know that mine would be the exact same in terms of a lot of your guys' res life type experiences or student affairs experiences because we weren't in the US. So for me, I think everywhere I've been, it's been a small school, so it's just everyone throws all their resources in and we all kind of have almost the same work-life balance, and we just are conscious as a team to say, look, you have your kid's birthday, please go to that today, go home, leave, go. The rest of us will take over today, but I don't know if that's how it is for others.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that that's probably a major difference in the expectations and just the difference of the systems. But I still think it was really valuable to hear that that's especially for folks, we might have people on this call who are interested in, moving to international student affairs and other higher ed. So that's great. Thanks, Lindsay. John.
So transitioning to IT and being more on the operations and business side of the university, it was kind of jarring almost for me to see how people were much more realistic with what we could do and budgets and what realistically we could do. Student affairs, I think there's always this expectation and oftentimes delivery of we can pull off anything. We can somehow make it work even if the budget went from 1,000 to 0, or our staff went from 50 RAs to 20 RAs, we'll still somehow deliver that same amount. And in IT, it was really different. One of the first meetings I was in, they were discussing and I was working through a project and, I kind of laid out the budget and they said, okay, well, we need this more, this part of the program more and these more cameras. And, my supervisor was very quick to say, no, that's the budget. You can't have that. And we're not going to cheapen everything else to get what you need. This is what you can have and this is what we can do. And here's what we can support, and we can't support the extra things that are needed. So for me, it was really, having a better understanding of what is realistic sometimes, and sometimes stepping back and going, okay, maybe that's a little bit too much that we could do, or we really can't afford to do that. What's realistic and how do I help them understand that and find that? And then, working with a lot of the different departments and especially with faculty, understanding their needs and how and why, our time is important. We can't always just jump in and support anything that they've bought. So sometimes to hear my boss say, oh, they bought that software without our approval, we're not going to support it. They can figure out how to install it and they can figure out how to use it, but we're not going to support it because they didn't follow the process and they didn't recognize that our time is valuable and we can't sometimes do everything that we need to do. So just being a little more realistic, and then, definitely that work-life balance. I think, coming in res life, you start out living in, so there's really never a good work-life balance. And then even if you transition to a live-out position, you still have that mindset almost of, well, I still need to be there when the students need me, and this thing is happening on the weekend or late at night, I need to come in. It was a little bit of adjustment to be more 9 to 5 sometimes, but also nice.
I just wanted to jump in. I had one key. John mentioned realistic. The pay is a lot more realistic. So, I actually dropped down from an assistant director to a coordinator, but had a pretty significant pay increase. So that definitely helps on other areas of the university as well.
Yeah, I will agree with Robyn. I was shocked when they offered me a salary and they're like, well, we know it's a little bit low, but you don't have a whole lot of IT experience. I'm looking at it going, this is like 25% more than I made in res life. I'll be happy with this.
Yeah. I'll definitely echo that. But it's not true for all nonprofits. So definitely do your research beforehand. So the question of culture, I think for me, it boils down to like 4 buckets, which I'll go through quickly. So higher education institutions, bureaucracy, they're overly bureaucratic most often. A lot of nonprofits are actually more of a startup mentality where you have a very flat organization, a lot of people doing everything. And so my program, to give you a specific example, has expanded from about 7 people when I was hired to we're approaching 40 now in 3 years. So that environment is just different. And I think it's been the biggest negative and challenge is that going from one extreme to the other. So that's something to contend with. The rest are a little bit more positive. Well, the next one kind of depends. So in higher ed, especially student affairs, you're responsible to the students and then the higher admin. So you're kind of in this vice grip of pressure. And I would say in nonprofit space, you are really much more accountable to your funders. So there's always going to be someone, like as Bob Dylan says, you got to serve somebody, right? So that is just something to be mindful of. Is the power dynamics a little different? Now the positives, deadlines. So you're not planning pre-orientation. You're not planning welcome week and move out. So deadlines can actually get moved. Like kind of as my colleagues on the call said, is like the expectations are a lot more realistic, and that's because there's not thousands of people that are going to come crashing into your workspace on a set time. And then I also had a pay bump. Again, not always true in nonprofits, but I have found and I've observed that the promotion process is much better. So my actual final call of leaving student affairs, at least for a while, was going through a 6-month promotion process to be put just over the pay limit where I could no longer receive overtime and then being given a ton more duties. So having experienced that, and then I went to my job now at Aspen and did it at a relatively analogous level, but then got a promotion a year later after my supervisor said I was doing good work and we didn't have to go through a 6-month HR process. So that is the upside of being in an upstart mentality, is that the opportunities for advancement are probably much faster. And student affairs kind of has this very narrow, steep funnel that it can be hard to get the promotions that folks that they have the skills to carry out.
Great, thank you so much for that, Travis. And thanks for everyone's perspective on that. You know, it's very interesting because you're all in very different roles, but there is some common threads through most of the answers, so that's great. So now is one of my favorite parts of the panels, and that is the happies and the crappies time. So what is the very best part of your role and what is the very worst part of your role? And I think we're back to starting with Lindsay for this one.
Well, I'll put this out there. I'm not currently working. I've got a couple jobs that are lined up, so I'm just going to respond as if I'm still at RTC again. Being there, everything was possible because we had such a forward-sighted director and founder. So when I created the BA in mass communication, for example, I gave him a budget and I was super scared because it's got video cameras and all of these things. And I said, to the best of my ability, I believe we have to spend at least $500,000 to get the equipment. He's like, oh yeah, that's what I thought. And he left. That was it. There was no, oh, get the budget down or, you know, whatnot. And for me, I, you know, shot on VHS and I, you know, did film. So I also wasn't so sure, but having that kind of support, those were amazing things that I had. And so that also transferred over when I was working with students and study abroad. So that kind of thing was the best thing ever. I haven't ever worked in a US student affairs type of setting. So what I can say is from my experiences abroad, students are difficult sometimes and being on call is difficult, and I like not being on call. I think that's a fantastic thing. So I think I'll leave it with that.
Perfect. Thank you, Lindsay. John, happies and crappies for you.
Sorry, my space bar stopped working all of a sudden. I think mine are in some ways one and the same. It's the customer service part of what I get to do. I think with COVID, it was really, challenging, but also really rewarding. Within, a week and a half, we would transition, 1,000 students and 500 staff to being work from home, teach from home, learn from home. And how do they use Zoom? How do they use Google Drive? How do they use all these different tools and all the hardware they needed? And, I can think of watching, I had a 90-year-old faculty that was suddenly recording lectures and doing interactive Zoom things with breakout rooms and chat sessions and using Canvas to interact with them. So really rewarding just to kind of watch how people are able to take the products and the things that we do and really translate it to how do they teach the students, how do the students learn. But that can also be challenging too at the same time, is dealing with those customers that are frustrated or that really don't want to change. We still have some other faculty that they don't understand, we went to an online transition and it's, well, no, I don't need to do that. If the students can't come to the classroom, I don't need to teach. And I don't need to learn all this new technology and I don't want to do all that. So the same frustration of, how do you help them transition and understand and grow and help them learn how to do it themselves rather than have them always look to you to do it as well. So I really do enjoy the customer service piece, but it can also be the challenge sometimes too.
Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Travis, what are your highs and lows?
Yeah, so I think the low is that funders have they come in a lot of different shapes. So you have to be ready to work with a variety of styles, and some of them are much more involved and micromanaging than others. So I have not at this time escaped the useless meeting problem. So I have a lot of meetings on my calendar that could probably be emails that aren't the best use of my time. So that has still carried through. But on the flip side, I think it has been really incredibly rewarding to help professionals at community colleges who are doing the work of helping students persist and be retained at higher levels. If you ever feel like higher ed can't change and that all of the we're just no one's in it for the right reasons, I really recommend reading through some of the schools that have been profiled by the Aspen Institute's Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence. So every other year we award $1 million to a community college that is dedicated itself to serving students and closing gaps between Black and Latinx students and their white and Asian peers. So there is really innovative work being done in community colleges, and getting to learn about that and support and sometimes give money for good work has been the best part.
Awesome, thank you. Let's see where we at. Robyn, we'll have you share your highs and lows.
Yeah, so I think, working for an institution like Virginia Tech is just really enlightening. I moved from a small religious institution, and so I was a little bit nervous about what I assumed would be kind of lack of values in the student population, but this institution has a really strong commitment to service that we extend into our work with advancement, and we really call upon it. The students really live it. The school motto is that I may serve. So, students get it tattooed on themselves all the time. Our Corps of Cadets with the military, that's at the center of all the programs that they do in their leadership programming. So that is one of the kind of cool things, and working really to benefit student learning, closing those same gaps that Travis has talked about for our students, especially in engineering, figuring out ways for underserved students to come in. And so our college even has programs starting K through 12 for STEM exposure in low income areas. So it's, we have programs where we bus students to campus once they're in middle school and stay on campus for a week and do STEM engagement. So being able to know that the work I'm doing is still directly impacting our students and the future of our citizenship is really cool. it's still higher ed. We still have more useless meetings that could have been emails than I could count, as Travis mentioned. And, you know, working at a large institution, the kind of bureaucracy and approval process for everything can still be really challenging. I mentioned those dotted lines. And while it works to get some support from both sides, sometimes it can be challenging to get support from both sides. It's a unique position, but I think overall it's many more happies than crappies for sure.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you, Robyn. So I'm curious about your various search process and if you made the determination that you wanted to stay in higher ed or if you were looking more broadly and just so happened to be in this position in higher ed, because some of your roles exist outside of higher ed as well, you know, obviously like IT support in different capacities. So that's my first part of this question. I'm kind of moving to the job search now. So I'm going to kind of offer a few things that maybe you want to speak about for our attendees, but don't feel like you have to answer all of them, you know, whatever kind of speaks to you. So that's one of my question I have is, was it an intentional move to stay or not? Another question I have is, did you have to do anything to your resume that was very specific to, you know, I think that we've all gotten pretty good at knowing about what a student affairs resume is usually looking for. Did you have to make changes to your resume? What did you specifically do for that? And then also I'm really curious about the interview process. How did it compare to what a student affairs interview process might look like in terms of timelines and presentations and things like that? So for this one, we'll start with John.
So I was in that I just kind of really come to the realization I was ready to move on from my position. I hadn't really thought about where or what or how to do that yet. And I just happened to be in a meeting at my university. We were kind of, I was kind of laying out my kind of overall vision of how we would transition the university to a system-wide access system and kind of my dream scenario of all that and how it would connect to residents' life. And, you know, someone within that said, you know, well, that's really impressive. We just need you to run it. And I kind of jokingly said, oh, sure, you could hire me to do that. And after the meeting, the director of IT pulled me aside and said, well, are you serious? I'm like, well, maybe I am. I guess what would that look like? And they kind of came back and said, well, kind of write up a job description. What do you think it would do? How would it involve? But we'd also want you to be involved in the service desk. So in some ways I got to create my position to a degree and create my area. But then the search was very quick. It was very defined. You know, they gave dates. They said, here's, you know, the application process. Here's when we're gonna do interviews and here's when we're gonna have a final decision, which was very different than student affairs, where I think it sometimes drags on a little too long. And in terms of my resume, you know, I had to very quickly change it to more of a functional resume. I focused a lot more on, here are my skill sets, here are my experiences, here are what I would bring to the position, and less about the positions and what I did, and more, you know, specific skills.
Great, thanks, John. Travis, what was your process like?
So as I alluded to earlier, it was a little scattershot. I was in my first full-time role, so I wasn't completely sure if I wanted to leave higher ed or if I wanted to leave my institution. I applied for a different job in student affairs at my institution, applied to another student affairs job at a different institution. I mentioned I did some for-profits. So it wasn't super planned out. And I applied for this one because it was different enough, but I could see the skills and knowledge and how transferred working with colleges. The process was rather, it was pretty fast. I think I applied probably in June or July, and I got the offer in August, which made my supervisor very happy that I was, but I managed to work it out. So I still did pre-orientation and then left a week later. And for my materials, I didn't do anything drastic. I think definitely I think it was still 2 pages. I would not go over that for non-higher ed jobs, especially early in your career. What I always recommend, even if you are applying to another job in student affairs or higher ed, is going through the job posting and highlighting the keywords that they're looking for, and then using that exact same language in your application materials. So I think some of the wording got changed because obviously nonprofits don't use the same language that student affairs does, but the overall structure was not too different. I also remember pulling out key examples of things that I thought met what they were looking for and bulleting them in my cover letter. So nothing drastic, just some small tweaks.
Awesome, thanks, Travis. Robyn, what was your experience?
Yeah, so echoing Travis's resume tips, my undergrad program was communications media, but it was very business focused. And so we had we had 2 1-credit courses on career prep. So definitely that's something that I do naturally anyway. So I'm not sure that I did it differently other than I would do it differently for any job posting that I was applying to. I wasn't necessarily looking to get out of student affairs when I did, but I definitely needed to get out of the role that I was in at the time. And having a spouse that I met and we worked together, I probably only stayed in my role as long as I did because he kept getting promoted in his role. So it just made sense for our family to stay there. And so I was actually interviewing for an event and communications director role at a nonprofit, like Downtown Improvement District, when my husband got the job offer to move down to Virginia. So I think when we moved, I was definitely comfortable in the higher ed field, and with 2 very large institutions in the area, that made for a pretty natural transition for me. But because we were location bound, I kind of came at it with a very open lens. I had some indirect experience in career support and things like that. So I was just kind of looking for job responsibilities that sounded interesting to me more than anything. But long term, I see that my career is meant to be in higher ed. It's something that I'm really passionate about. And so I can't imagine working in any other field at this point. And seeing all the opportunities that I've kind of been able to create out of the student affairs background, and understanding that there definitely are more opportunities to pursue providing educational opportunities for college students outside of being directly in student affairs and student support.
Great, thanks, Robyn. And that's actually a question that came in through the chat privately that I was going to ask you all next. So you just answered it, which is your next job, and I'm adding here, but whether that's in 1 month or 10 years from now, no talk about actually when that will be, but will it be still in higher education? And so for you, Robyn, it sounds like it will be. So Lindsay, I know you might have a little bit different experience here. So if you want to kind of tackle both of those questions at once,
Sure.
In terms of your search, as well as where's next for you.
All right, so I always knew I didn't want to be in the US, and my parents both kind of were pushing me out, both in the education. So they said, you've already done the US, go somewhere else, is essentially what they said. So I specifically had been looking for different opportunities, and I have used Idealist and Dave's ESL Cafe multiple times to find jobs. And beyond that, I used to run experimental learning trips abroad. So the Experiment in International Living is one that's very well organized. If you want to be on the road and you aren't location bound, or you want something short to see if this is something you want to do, that's a great way to go. Concordian Language Villages is also a great one to do. When I look at different types of opportunities, I started moving around for me, and I went to several different countries, and then I met my partner abroad, and we kind of went with, who will accept a US passport and an India passport? Take us both or we don't go. And it was a fun experiment in which countries will take us. And so through that, we kind of found where are the universities abroad, where are the schools that accept expats abroad. So mine was quite a different route, and it's essentially the same way still. is that we just go, okay, where can we go that's new, fun, and exciting that will take both of our passports? So that's a little bit on the looking for different places, but in that same thread, I still work for CIS Australia, which does short-term groups in different countries. And I enjoy this. I like not having necessarily roots. I know that that doesn't work for a lot of people, but I enjoy it. With that, my resumes are very different anyway. I have an academic one, I have a admin one, and I have a, I don't know, whatever this other job is, but what everyone else said is just tailor it to what not. And then I've been approached several times on LinkedIn. So I would highly suggest, you know, if you're looking, just keep it updated. And even if you're not looking, I've had headhunters come and, you know, ask me to do an interview when I'm not ready to move. So it's there and it's possible. It's just a matter of, you know, timing and if things are right. So when John said that, I understood completely, because sometimes you get, you know, called in without, you know, maybe I'm not joking, these types of things. So I think that's what I have.
That's great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. And the international educator in me loves the answer of figuring out who will take both of our passports and going from there. That's awesome. So we'll move to John. John, whether you're leaving in 1 day, 10 years, who knows, will it be in higher ed, or would you look to a different industry?
For now, I'm very happy in higher ed. I've always enjoyed higher ed. Other than a year of teaching after college, it's what I've done since then. And I've really enjoyed just the atmosphere, the learning, and especially just the students. I think that for me has what's kept me there. I've now been, like Lindsay said, with LinkedIn, you know, headhunters oftentimes are reaching out to me of, hey, we'd really like you to apply for this IT job, or would you be willing to get us a resume because we want to put it out here or there. And I've, you know, looked a little, but so far I've always been willing to stay and enjoyed higher ed too much to be ready to jump, but I can't say what's going to happen in the future.
Thanks, John. Travis?
Yeah, so I want to stay in the higher ed area because if I think about the impact I want to have on society, this is where my skill set is. It's the confluence of a lot of things I care about, and I think that there's actual potential, despite all of the terrible problems, to have a relatively big impact. So I'm committed to staying in higher ed, but I am actually leaving my role at the end of the summer to start my PhD in higher education at Michigan State. So I'll be doing that full time. Thank you. And this role actually gave me the confidence to do that because I've always been very interested in research and potentially being a faculty member. But I think going to Ohio State, we had a course called Core Academic Issues, which I subtitled Why You Should Not Be a Faculty Member. And it's basically like all the things all the hoops you have to jump through. So that scared me off for a while. But having this job and seeing like this big, expansive space of nonprofits, of researchers, of philanthropies that are trying to better understand what is happening and in education and also impact positive change. I know that there's a space to go back to that's not student affairs if the faculty route doesn't work out for whatever reason.
That's great. Thank you so much, Travis. Thank you to all of our panelists. I think that all of the questions that have come in, we've had a chance to answer. Panelists, is there anything that I didn't ask or that the attendees didn't ask that you would like to share before we wrap up? Lindsay, it looks like you've got something.
Yeah. I just want to say that if you're looking at it, just talk to your personal networks. Normally, someone knows someone. That's what I found, that all of my students, I have students that I've taught from around the globe, literally, and when they ask me, I may not have any idea, but if I just send a simple like, hey, does anyone know anything about blank? Someone normally pops up and is like, oh, I do. I'm like, oh, can I introduce you to my former student? They would like some help. I feel that we don't utilize our personal networks as well as we could. And even if it's just like jumping back on LinkedIn and, you know, just catching up with people that you haven't talked to in a, you know, crazy long time and just, hey, where are you? What's going on? You know, I feel that that's one of the things that my background is communication, so I do often, but I realize that most of the people that I've ever trained don't do that. They don't utilize, you know, their Facebook, they don't utilize their LinkedIn. And I think that's a super important part because we can't know it all, but we all have pieces.
That's great advice, Lindsay. I agree wholeheartedly. And I've heard some people will go so far as like keeping a spreadsheet of contacts and like indicating when the last they reach out to folks were. And I can say that I've been on the receiving end of some of those messages sometimes, I think, with former students who will, you know, like once a year around the same time, they'll reach out and be like, oh, I just wanted to check in. And even though I know that there's some sort of systematic way that they're doing this, I don't mind because it's great to hear from them. It's great to get their updates, and I know what's going on in their life so that if in the future there are things that I can share with them or speak about on, you know, on their behalf, I'm happy to do it. So I think that's great.
Yeah, I was going to echo the LinkedIn. I didn't actually have a personal LinkedIn until I started this job, and I just use it to stalk my alumni. But the personal connections that I've found in that way, and definitely, you know, if you don't have someone in your personal network that you want to reach out to, or you're kind of searching undercover and you don't want to talk to your colleagues, reach out to folks from your alma mater that might be in an industry that you're curious about. Find them on LinkedIn. It doesn't have to be somebody that you know that could, you know, expose your secret search. But, you know, just reach out. I think, you know, as alumni, folks are willing to help one another, and that network of your alma mater is really important to be able to just explain where some options for stuff. I have a student that reached out to me, and I've connected her to 4 or 5 alumni that have gone completely different directions with their engineering degree because she loves engineering. She wants to stay in her degree program and not change at this point, but she's not sure that's what she wants to do with her career. So using those networks. And then I didn't share my resume because I'm a terrible person. I haven't updated it since I started this job 2 years ago. But I do love helping people with their resumes, and I'm happy to update mine and send it along. My husband is going back to work in a couple weeks, and my child's going back to daycare. So I will be able to, you know, focus on something like updating a resume. So if anybody wants help, there's been a couple people through the group that I've connected with and given them some advice. So I'm happy to help anybody with that. I get really nerdy about resumes. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robyn. I appreciate it. Anything else to add before we wrap up?
I'll just say something quick, that if you are uncertain if you want to leave higher education, I would definitely recommend folks look at community colleges as places to work. There are some great ones out there doing really innovative work. You can find them through the CEP website. They tend to be a little bit more 9 to 5. I mean, there might be more night shifts for part-time students, adult students, students with families, but it's a lot. It's a little bit more professional because you're often dealing with older students. You're not doing as much of the programmatic aspects. And a lot of them are doing really cool stuff around student success. And so reorganizing the institution using data in innovative ways. And I would also say that there are a lot of skills in student affairs that make you highly hireable, and to not be afraid to apply for things that may seem like just outside your reach. Like, I did not think I was going to get this job. I told someone I applied for this job, and they said, "Are you qualified to do that?" And I said, "I have no idea." So definitely do that. And I think another good example is one of the best student success leaders at one of the colleges I work with was trained as a faculty member in theater. And she is now the interim provost at her institution and has led that institution to double-digit gains in student success metrics. So do not, yes, it is also a great faculty role. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
I'll echo what Travis said. Definitely take reaches and take risks on jobs you apply. The worst that's going to happen is they never reach out to you or never reply to your resume. But you'll be surprised, you know, how many skills you really have from student affairs that transfer to just about any other area. During my time in Res Life, I had, I think, 8 area coordinators that I hired. And out of them now, I think 1 is in student affairs. The rest have all moved into anything from they're running their own software company to they're a minister to they're running, you know, an HR firm at a business. So it really prepares you well, regardless of where you jump to next.
Awesome. Well, that is a fantastic way, I think, to wrap up and give all of our maybe current or future expats hope for whatever is next. So thank you, John, Lindsay, Robyn, Travis, thank you so much for being with us today. And I look forward to seeing everyone at our next panel, which is tonight at 5:15 Eastern. So I'll see y'all then, and then 2 more tomorrow, and then we're done with this series. So thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon. Take care.
Thank you.